Hi everyone. So this is a review of the movie Pawn Sacrifice, which I just saw yesterday. Basically, the movie is about the life about Bobby Fischer, the famous chess player who in 1972 played Boris Spassky in a championship to be the best player in the world at the height of the Cold War when it was the Russians versus the U.S. The Russians had basically had dominated the world of chess after World War II, and they used chess as a form of kind of propaganda where they stated that basically that their system, the communist system, basically was a better system, and as proof, they showed that in a game of it's considered to be an intellectual game, they were the best in the world year after year after year. Now, what of course bugged them about this was Bobby Fischer came from the U.S. and at the time, chess and in certain ways it still is considered somewhat of a minor sport. It's not like people like it as much as it's like football or baseball or basketball or anything like that. And basically, Fischer started first playing at the age of 6 when his sister brought like a toy chess set, and they brought it and she started playing it and he became obsessed with the game to the point where his whole life revolved around chess at an early age. So what happens is in the movie he's played by Tobey Maguire, who you might remember from such movies as Pleasantville and Spider-Man. And he does a really good job of portraying Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer was, by all accounts, a genius. He had an IQ of 180. But he didn't really do well in school. He actually found school to be kind of a nuisance. In fact, when he got old enough at the age of 16, he stopped school. He never graduated actually from high school so he could focus on chess. Now, just to give you a sense of, what that must have been like for him. At the age of 15, he became the U.S. chess champion. Now, try to imagine you're 15 years old and you're the absolute best in your country, beating people that have been playing chess for 20 some odd years. Now, chess back then didn't make a lot of money. He tried to make a living off of it, and of course, other than Russia, where basically the Russian players were supported by their government, U.S. Basically he was always like never really he was just scraping by really, and he never really had the support that he could have had. Now in the movie you start to see, like when he's young, some of the paranoia where it starts developing. Like you see his mother Regina, who I understand was a very smart lady. She actually spoke 7 languages. And she was a communist sympathizer, so there were always people like essentially keeping tabs on her. And you see that in the movie where outside there's a car essentially taking pictures of them by the window, and so his mother warns him that there are these bad people that are out to get them, and you can see where the beginnings of the paranoia begin. So in the movie you see that they don't tell you that in real life. His mother actually took him to a psychiatrist when he was young, worried about his obsession for chess. But the psychiatrist says, well, there are worse things that could happen, and they didn't think it was a big deal that he had such an obsession over a game. Well, what happened was that she was trying to find him kids his own age to play with, because a lot of kids weren't interested, and she put like an ad out, and a gentleman by the name of Carmen Negro, who wasn't exactly a great player, but he was like someone who liked chess. He heard about it. He told Bobby about his house, and he had a lot of chess books. And Bobby would go to his house all the time and absorb that knowledge that was in those books. Bobby's just was like a sponge soaking everything in, and then he started playing at the Manhattan Chess Club regularly. And it wasn't until about the age of 11 that, as Bobby said, that's when he started to get good. He started to really excel. So in the movie, Tobey Maguire plays him, and you see, him throughout the stage, and you see the paranoia begin to be where he's worried that the Russians are out to get him. He felt that the Russians were cheating. Essentially, what they were doing was they were agreeing to draws to when they would play each other and saving their energy just for him. So you see that kind of the paranoia that he had, and that you could see it developing, and that's really well done by Tobey Maguire. I thought his performance was excellent. There are a couple of inaccuracies in the movie, like for example, they show the first game of the '72 match between Fischer and Spassky, and in the movie you see that Fischer tries to capture like one of Fischer's rook's pawn and with his bishop, and it gets trapped. In the movie, Fischer realizes it's a bad move and resigns on the spot. Well, that's actually an inaccuracy. In the actual game, even though Fischer knew afterwards it was a bad move, he kept playing on. And there's been some discussion over the years that the game could have been drawn if he had played a little bit better. But in the end, Fischer, Spassky developed an advantage because he basically got Fischer gave up his bishop for 2 pawns, and bishop's worth about 3 pawns, so it's actually a bad exchange. And eventually, Spassky won that first game. And Fischer blamed, the noise, as a distraction, both with the cameras because they were recording using cameras, and as well as the crowd. The crowd would be, coughing, eating candy, what have you, and it was a distraction to him. So much so that he refused to play the second game. He didn't actually show up, and he forfeited the second game down 2-0. Now, people have described that being down 2-0 in a championship set is actually very much like being in a baseball game where you're down 5-0 going into the bottom of the ninth. You just simply don't come back from that. So what happened was Fischer said that he wanted to play in a quiet room, and you see that in the movie where after the loss he goes and finds the room where they play table tennis. I don't know if that actually happened in in real life. I do know that Game 3 was played in a room that's normally played for table tennis. But what they don't tell you is that Boris could have decided not to play in that room. If he had decided the game had to be held in the main lobby, Fischer would have had to resign that one, would have been down 3-0, and pretty much the championship would have been over. But Boris Spassky didn't want to win that way. He was a gentleman, and he wanted it to be played out on the board, so he agreed to Fischer's demand to play in the ping pong room. Well, let me give you a sense of what that had been like. Until then, Fischer had never beaten Spassky. At best, Fischer had 2 draws and I guess 3 losses, considering that first game. So for him to agree to the ping pong room was really no big deal, because at that point Fischer had never beaten him. So why should he be concerned about it? Well, a lot of people blamed his giving into Fischer's demands at the beginning of the loss, because once Fischer beat him in Game 3, it's like all of a sudden Fischer just started to manhandle him. He started just beating him over and over. So much so that the Russians start like, what is going on here? How could this player who had never beaten him just steamroll our best player? But what's going on? And they started accusing the U.S. of perhaps using dirty tricks, about perhaps poisoning his orange juice, or perhaps putting something in Fischer's chair that was disturbing Spassky. The KGB actually had the orange juice flown to have it tested, and they found nothing unusual about it. And there was a little bit of controversy about the chair that Fischer was used in the first X-ray, which you see in the movie. They showed there was nothing there, but in reality, the first X-ray, they showed some kind of cylindrical tube that didn't show up in another set of pictures. So the question is, what was in that tube? Was there any merit to it? There's been some crazy ideas that maybe a Russian player may have actually put the tube there to kind of discredit Fischer, and then later realized what a stupid idea was and took it away. The only thing they ever found when they looked at Fischer's chair was like wood filler. And then there was also the scene in Game 3 where Spassky complains about the chair making too much noise. I think that was in reference to an actual life. Fischer's chair in the match was actually taller, and Spassky complained about it. But the reason why it was taller is because Fischer was 6 inches bigger than he was, and he needed a chair that had to be adjusted for his height. And also there was another inaccuracy because they make it look like they played multiple games in that little ping pong room, but in reality it was only 3. It was only the Game 3 that the ping pong room. Then they returned to the normal room. Now, the one thing I do enjoy was they actually showed the game 6, which is the one that's the most interesting game of all. What happened was at that point, Fischer had come back and it was tied 2.5 points to 2.5 points, and they were going into game 6. So what happened was his Spasskys group had told him to basically to prepare other openings in case Fischer ever wavered from his, his normal move. His normal move is to play e4, which is this move here. That's the one that he's best known for. In fact, there's a saying, best by test, which is what Fischer would normally play. So when Spassky was told by his people that don't bother, Fischer will never play anything other than e4, he was caught completely surprised when Fischer did this, the English opening. Fischer had only really used it maybe 2 or 3 times in serious play. So just try to imagine you've been spending all night trying to prepare a response to e4, and then he hits you with this. It must have been a tremendous psychological blow to Spassky to have this unexpected choice of first move. And then the other thing that's interesting about this game was Fischer slowly began to control this game, and slowly he created such a position that Spasskys rooks were basically passive, unable to do much of anything, while Fischer's rooks were active. And slowly, if you could imagine a room where somebody has control of the air, that's what Fischer was doing. He was slowly suffocating Spassky to where Spassky had to resign, because Fischer had just built up such an advantage little by little that eventually it just became too much. And of course, in the movie you see that, but in the movie you see what actually happened. Spassky was so impressed by the way Fischer played out game 6 that he literally got up and he cheered him on, which is something you don't see in chess. Like you see, like players in chess will, after a match, they'll go into a room and they'll kind of review the games with themselves and trying to help each other out. You'll see that in tournaments, but to see someone actually get up and cheer their opponent for the brilliant game that they play, you just don't see that. So in case, like I said, this was a really good movie. It shows just, like even though there was chess involved, it wasn't like, showing move after move and having people getting lost in terms of what was really going on, because a lot of people don't play chess, so they may not understand like why certain moves are beneficial over others. So they kind of, they kind of kept it to a minimum, and it really focused on the human side about showing Fischer's breakdown. And it is, in a way, it's a kind of a tragic tale, because basically Fischer, as I said, from a young age was dedicated essentially his life to chess, a sport which was, again, not particularly well thought out or well appreciated by the U.S. public. In Russia, yes, but not in the U.S. In fact, there's kind of a famous story, like when he was in school. There's one point where you see he's playing on a pocket set, and his teacher's trying to teach a lesson, and he tells Charles Fischer, "Please put the chess pieces away. Please put the," and then Fischer plays out the game in his head. So, like I said, at the age of 16, Fischer essentially quit high school, so he never got his high school education. So once he won the championship, he basically had nothing left to prove. He kind of disappeared from chess. He lived in seclusion. When they were supposedly going to have the championship in '75, where he was going to defend his title, he came up with a series of demands, and they had agreed to basically all of them, except for one. He didn't want draws to count. He wanted, he wanted the first person to reach 10 points to be the winner, and in the case of if it was 9-9, he would retain the title. Not only did the challenger have to get 10 points, but they had to win by a margin of 2. They never agreed to that, and so his championship was essentially taken away from him and given to Anatoly Karpov, which Karpov after that decided he had to prove to people that hey, he actually had earned it, and he was one of the more prolific players once he earned his championship, to kind of tell people, hey, this was actually earned. It wasn't just given to me. So I thought the performances by everyone was great. I thought the performance by the actor, I think his name is Lev, who played Boris Spasskys, was great. There were a couple of things that did bother me a little bit. One, there's a scene where Fischer shows how basically chess was not supported, and it gets put in this dive of a hotel and complaining how noisy it is, and then this lady comes out of the hotel and says, "Well, stop making noise," and it becomes somewhat of a love interest. I don't think Fischer actually was ever romantically involved with anyone, so that was kind of inaccurate. Also, they made it look like his sister Joan was very much involved in his life and worried about his mental health. I think that part was also done for dramatic purposes, because I think basically, I don't think his sister really involved himself much in his life. I think once he started focusing on chess, both his mother, which he kind of got away from her because she was always trying to promote him, always essentially trying to make money off of him, and he kind of resented that. And I think his sister, again, I don't think she ever involved himself much in his life. So there are a couple of inaccuracies, and I guess it was done to to just kind of make it more dramatic, and make it seem like he obviously had some mental health issues, and yes, he was a genius, but it's a cautionary tale about like what happens when you become obsessed with just one thing and one thing only to the exclusion of everything else. What happens when you have nothing left? So again, I thought it was a really good movie. I thought it was well acted. I really like the fact that it's approachable. Even though it is about chess, you don't bore people by showing move after move after move, which a lot of people who don't play chess wouldn't understand the significance of the moves. So again, a really good movie, and definitely worth watching. So that was basically my review. A really good movie, a really good plot about about the dangers of obsession, and they did also have a couple of inaccuracies, but overall it was a really good movie, and it was kind of nice to see some elements that I've only heard about or read about, and see it portrayed. So anyway, definitely go see the movie. So please leave comments below.